Making their case before the American people, U.S. presidential nominees Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump face off in their first TV debate. How important is it in deciding which candidate people vote for? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jane Dutton. He questioned her stamina. She accused him of hiding something. US Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton and her Republican rival Donald Trump came face to face in their first presidential debate. The candidates fought over the economy, national security and foreign policy. With just 6 weeks before the election, polls suggest the race for the country's top job is tight. Clinton highlighted her extensive experience while in public office, from First Lady, then Senator to Secretary of State. But Trump blamed her for many of America's problems, including the threat of ISIL.
We're hoping that within the year we'll be able to push ISIS out of Iraq and then, really squeeze them in Syria. But we have to be cognizant of the fact that they've had foreign fighters coming to volunteer for them, foreign money, foreign weapons. So we have to make this the top priority. And I would also do everything possible to take out their leadership.
Secretary Clinton is talking about taking out ISIS. We will take out ISIS. Well, President Obama and Secretary Clinton created a vacuum the way they got out of Iraq, because they got out. They shouldn't have been in, but once they got in, the way they got out was a disaster, and ISIS was formed.
The candidates also addressed the recent police shootings against unarmed black men across the U.S. Clinton says the government needs to restore trust between communities and police to ensure officers use force only when necessary.
Everyone should be respected by the law, and everyone should respect the law. Right now, that's not the case in a lot of our neighborhoods. So I have, ever since the first day of my campaign, called for criminal justice reform. I've laid out a platform that I think would begin to remedy some of the problems we have in the criminal justice system.
African Americans, Hispanics are living in hell because it's so dangerous. You walk down the street, you get shot. In Chicago, they've had thousands of shootings, thousands, since January 1st. Thousands of shootings. And I'm saying, where is this? Is this a war-torn country? What are we doing? And we have to stop the violence. We have to bring back law and order.
Let's bring in our guests. Joining us here in the studio in Doha is Jocelyn Sage Mitchell, Assistant Professor at Northwestern University in Qatar. In New York, Lincoln Mitchell, no relation, I believe, author and journalist specializing in political development. And in Philadelphia, David Love, Executive Editor of the online magazine blackcommentator.com. A very warm welcome to all of you. Jocelyn Sage Mitchell, that presidential debate, was it a good one?
Well, yes and no. It was a good one for Hillary because she succeeded in her goals. It was a bad one for Trump because he failed in his.
Was there anything that really stood out for you? Because that's clearly important if that's the outcome of it.
I think for me, the two main goals that these two candidates had were that they were both appealing to the same audience. That 20% roughly of voters in the middle that are saying either they're undecided or that they might be supporting the third parties. And I think that both of them were trying to craft messages to talk to that particular audience and to get that audience on their side. For Hillary, it was about the trust issue, right? Trust has a lot of different components to it. So we see, for example, that trust can be a form of judgment. She was able to answer the email question that came up quickly, succinctly. She acknowledged the mistake. She took responsibility for it, and she apologized. I think it was over in, 3 sentences.
So obviously she's hoping that that's going to end that long-running saga.
It won't end the saga, but what it did was it was speaking to that audience that says, I don't know if I trust her judgment because of the emails. She was trying to put that to rest. There's trust in terms of knowledge. She did a great job handling policy question after policy question, which we expect to see from her, but she did a great job not dropping the ball. But then she also did a great job kind of dealing with this implicit trust question, which is really wrapped up in gender. She is going to be the first, if she gets elected, the first female president of the United States. And for a lot of people, men and women, there is an implicit question going on. There is a subconscious feeling, if it's not a conscious feeling, do I feel comfortable with a female as the person running this country, you know? And I think that she was able to do a really interesting balance there, where she was able to show, I'm stable, I'm prepared, I'll keep you safe, but at the same time not transgress gender boundaries by acting in too masculine of a way that would make people feel uncomfortable.
I do want to talk more about the gender issue, not only in these debates and from the public a little bit later on, but let me bring you in, Lincoln Mitchell. I mean, do you agree that Hillary Clinton was the winner here, that she played it better than Trump?
Well, you know, there's no scorebook here. There's no scorekeeping. So this is a subjective answer. In my view, yes. I mean, but she started with the advantage of having a grip on the policies, being able to conduct herself in a mature way. These are skill sets that Mr. Trump doesn't have, and that works to his disadvantage. However, I would say I've watched all of the Republican primary debates, and Donald Trump last night was, I've also watched all the general election debates over the course of my life since, you know, Reagan and Mondale. What I saw from Donald Trump last night was interesting. It was the most in control, the most mature we've seen from Donald Trump this election season, but at the same time, qualitatively less in control, more interrupting, less balanced than we've seen from anyone else from either party who's been on that stage that I've ever seen. So Trump did about the best he could. So less in control,
but possibly not good enough. Sorry, more in control, but not good enough.
By the standards of somebody, not good enough by somebody, if we're holding to the standards, who would actually be the president of the United States. Good enough for, I don't know, the president of a junior high school? Probably. But if this is the most presidential we're going to see from Donald Trump, then what we're going to see is this is not a guy who's going to campaign that he can be presidential. He's got to find another message to move those undecided voters that Dr. Mitchell was talking about.
Because obviously that's incredibly important, how articulate he is. He speaks in very short sentences. We see many non sequiturs. I mean, it's important for the American public and eventually on the international stage if he gets that far when he's dealing with real adversaries.
Right, and I would, you know, the reliance on extremes. Everyone is tremendous or a disaster. There's no middle ground. Of course, the reality of politics is that it's all in the middle ground. And his inability to see the world that way is very troubling. I would also add, when you watch Donald Trump on stage, listen to the asides. That's when he's really telling the truth. That's when he's the most open. And if you listen to the question on NATO, he was asked about NATO, and he said, as an aside, I hadn't given it much thought, but, well, if you are running for President of the United States, you very certainly should have given NATO a lot of thought. To openly admit, well, I never really thought about NATO. This is a man who was a child of the Cold War era, right? When Donald Trump was growing up, NATO was in the news every single day, right?
It's pretty important.
To not have given NATO much thought, to not know that NATO is involved in fighting terrorism every day, this is appalling. This is an appalling lack of knowledge that is kind of made worse by his inability to articulate these basic thoughts. So again, by the standards of Donald Trump, a good night. Overall, I don't think he moved the needle the way he needed to.
David Love, what are your thoughts? Who's the winner, who's the loser for you, and where do you think it leaves the race for the presidency now?
I would begin by saying that there's no question that Hillary Clinton won. And I preface that by saying that far too often, I think these debates devolve into forms of entertainment, glitzy forms of entertainment. And to some degree, I believe that that debate was rather entertaining. It's just sad that so much is at stake. But with that said, it is clear that Trump really has no command of the issues. He talks in these vague generalities. We have to believe that, you know, take his word for it that he's going to solve all of these problems, gives no specifics, provides no data. And even when he does provide what he believes are facts, he's called out on them, and he denies. And it's a situation where he creates his own facts. And I think that one useful aspect to this debate was that the public was able to see exactly how he would act as a president. And it's clear that he has no qualifications for the job, and it would be a disaster. At the same time, I believe that many of the people who support him probably don't care about all of those aspects. However, on the margins, those who actually have no idea who they're going to vote for, perhaps after seeing his performance last night, they have a new, a new window into how he would be as a president, and I think that he would be a resounding disaster.
Okay, you mentioned some of the issues that he skirts over or possibly doesn't know much about. I mean, the candidates, both of them touched on the nuclear agreement reached with Iran. Trump called it a horrible deal, but Clinton said Tehran was just weeks away from developing a nuclear bomb when she became Secretary of State. She was also instrumental in helping bring Iran to the negotiating table.
I spent a year and a half putting together a coalition that included Russia and China to impose the toughest sanctions on Iran. And we did drive them to the negotiating table. And my successor, John Kerry, and President Obama got a deal that put a lid on Iran's nuclear program without firing a single shot. That's diplomacy. That's coalition building. That's working with other nations.
So you say to yourself, why didn't they make the right deal? This is one of the worst deals ever made by any country in history. The deal with Iran will lead to nuclear problems. All they have to do is sit back 10 years, and they don't have to do much, and they're going to end up getting nuclear.
So we heard about Clinton's achievements there, David, and we know that Donald Trump would shoot Iranian vessels out of the water, those are his words, if they bothered American ships. Do you think that concerns people? Will they be stocking up on tuna and water, worried that he's going to be hitting that nuclear button every time he gets angry?
I would say that he really demonstrates his erratic, unpredictable, capricious behavior, and that was on display. You can agree or disagree with his point of view or with Hillary Clinton's policy points, but she does have experience in engaging with other nations, with hard negotiations. And, as far as the Iran deal is concerned, it does speak to the ability to engage with Muslim nations, Arab nations, at a time when the country cares a lot about terrorism. I'd like to know how Donald Trump would plan to engage with these nations to create more stability in the Middle East region when throughout this campaign season he has displayed nothing but Islamophobia and hatred for people who are so-called others. It really speaks to how the United States would isolate itself under a Trump presidency, and all of the problems around the world, the United States would lose its ability to effectively be involved in these hotspots.
Jocelyn, what do you think the political message was there? Firstly, as future commander-in-chief of one of the most important nations in the world, what it means for foreign policy. And also, we look at what's been happening on the streets, the shooting of unarmed black men, and you hear some of the words there coming from both candidates. Who would be the better person to oversee what's happening in both areas?
Well, again, this comes back to the idea of temperament. And, Lincoln, you made a great point where you said this is maybe the most mature that we've seen Donald Trump be, and yet it's still not enough. And David said, look, people were able to see how he would act, and it would be a disaster. And I completely agree here. you know, the very first question, I mean, and that's why I said he failed at the beginning, because his goal was simply to act presidential, to look, to act and to sound presidential, and he did not manage to accomplish that. The very first answer, he was fairly restrained. It's very interesting. You can go back and watch. His face is calm and composed. His voice is moderate. He gives this reasoned response. He's not very fidgety. I remember thinking to myself, is this the new and improved Trump 2.0 that we've all been waiting for? And then Hillary had a response to it, needled him a little bit on a $14 million loan from his dad, and boom, it was all over. It was all over. His voice started going, fidgeting, drinking water, making faces, interrupting. He interrupted 25 times, roughly. She interrupted around 5. And that's a big difference in terms of the demeanor that somebody puts out there.
And temperament is clearly very important, and must have been important because Donald Trump mentioned it several times. He said an important characteristic for the next president is temperament. He said he's got it, but Clinton doesn't.
I think my strongest asset, maybe by far, is my temperament. I have a winning temperament. I know how to win. She does not know how to win.
Clinton.
Wait, the AFL-CIO the other day, behind the blue screen, I don't know who you were talking to, Secretary Clinton, but you were totally out of control. I said, there's a person with a temperament that's got a problem.
Secretary Clinton.
Woo, okay. A man who can be provoked by a tweet should not have his fingers anywhere near the nuclear codes, as far as I think anyone with any sense about this should be concerned.
Lincoln, the audience were told that they can't get involved in any way, and yet they weren't able to stop themselves from laughing when he spoke about his temperament. And I believe, you know, Twitter activity just, you know, shot through the roof. This is not good for him. Why can he not control that side?
Trump is, you know, in the language of the playground, a bully. And when you push back against a bully, they can't handle it. That's one of the defining characters of a bully. And I suspect that Hillary Clinton's debate prep team told her that. Push back, draw the reaction. The notion that Donald Trump has a better temperament, regardless of what you think of Hillary Clinton, you might think she's a liar, you might think she's crooked, but you also know and have seen that she can sit there calmly, that she can make tough decisions, whether or not you agree with them, that she has the temperament that we generally associate with the president. But Donald Trump didn't give an example of him having a good temperament. He just repeated over and over, I have a good temperament. And that is because he's very insecure about that issue, because, of course, he has a terrible temperament, right? He has said up front that I will make foreign policy. If people say nice things to me, I will be nice to them. He said this about Putin. Can you imagine if we use that as a guiding principle in foreign policy? He has gone after people. There was a contretemps in the news this morning because Hillary Clinton last night pointed out that he had referred to women as pigs, and another really misogynist language, and they talked about an example of a Miss Universe contestant who is Latina, who Donald Trump teased about not teased, really abused about her weight, and because she was Latina referred to as Miss Housekeeper, which is really a nasty racist and sexist slur. On the news today, Donald Trump didn't try to change the subject when it was brought up. He didn't apologize. He continued to attack. And when we see a presidential candidate who is that easy to irritate, who that easily attacks people who are not running for president, who aren't even American in this case, who are just kind of going on with their lives, you really, I'm not sure she's not American, I believe she wasn't though, you really see this temperament, how thin-skinned he is. And being a president requires you to be able to take a little bit of criticism. I mean, he spent 5 years questioning whether Barack Obama is an American citizen. Can you imagine how Donald Trump would react if somebody spent 5 minutes questioning if he really had as much money as he claims he has, or if his hair is real? He wouldn't be able to handle it, and it could cause an international crisis.
So, David, several issues raised there, and I know that you host a radio show, and I'm just wondering what people say about those issues. You know, for example, Barack Obama not being truly American, the way Donald Trump feels about women. And I just don't want to go just against Trump here, but I'm just wondering how people listen to this sort of information and what sort of impact it has on their lives and what they see in the next president of the U.S.
Well, in many ways, the issues that Trump has raised this campaign season, from people that I speak to, it speaks to a harsh political tone in this country. People are frustrated, they're angry, they feel as if they lack control over their daily lives, and all of a sudden someone appears who gives a lot of promises, points fingers at scapegoats, blame these people for your problems, and all of a sudden things, you know, all of your issues, all of your hardships will go away. Donald Trump is channeling that. He is speaking to that frustration that some Americans have, unfortunately, and very often it's in code. When you look at his attitude towards women, I think that what he's really doing subtly is telling people, well, when I'm president, we're going to go back to the good old days when women were remained in the home, didn't have all this power, didn't have jobs. People of color, they'll know their place, and white people will once again reign supreme. He can't say that outright, although in some ways he comes pretty close to it. But it's sort of like a dog whistle. Unfortunately, the dog whistle has turned into a bullhorn, where he has allowed people who subscribe to that point of view to speak it freely.
Okay.
He's like a role model,
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Let me
is uttering all of these things.
Let me put this to Jocelyn. So all three of you agree that she did a better job. Some of the stuff that comes out of his mouth is pretty frightening. Hillary Clinton is viewed as cold. A lot of people don't trust her. She represents the establishment. So what impact is this debate going to have going forward? Will it change anything? Because every time Donald Trump is accused of botching something up, he somehow comes out stronger.
Well, it's a great question. I personally think that that Hillary was able to combat that image of maybe being cold. As I mentioned, she really kind of did a nice balancing act of the different things that a woman must do on that kind of stage. For example, she smiled almost incessantly. Her voice was always very carefully modulated. She almost never raised her voice. She almost never interrupted, and when Trump interrupted her, she smiled and stopped. We have seen opposite kinds of behavior from her. In the debates with Bernie Sanders, in the Democratic primary, she was very comfortable having shouting matches and talking over each other and being aggressive and interrupting. And she purposefully did a different tact here. And I think that this tack is going to really pay off for her in terms of a bump in the polls after this.
Lincoln, we've got two more of these presidential debates left. Briefly, if you will, tell us what your expectations are and what each candidate needs to focus on now.
Well, the expectations will be driven by the polls. Right now, Hillary is generally in most of the polls about 3 to 5 points up. If that continues into the second and third debate, we'll see from Hillary a lot of what we saw last night. Play it relatively safe, go back to your game, and don't let him have any openings. Now, if Donald Trump is still 3 to 5 points down as the election approaches, he's going to have a bigger strategy, somehow breaking through. So we will see perhaps an angrier, more aggressive Donald Trump. If the race tightens, however, we may see Hillary going after Donald Trump more. I mean, for example, there were a lot of things that were not raised last night. No one talked about Trump University. No one talked about, Hillary Clinton could have talked more about Trump's business practices. To use the language of the former mayor of New York, she could have described him more as a con man, which she didn't. So there are more negatives with Trump. The other thing to think about is that, remember, this is America. We don't have a national election. We have 50 state elections. So if there are certain states where they have to move voters to win, you will see that, right? 90 Minutes last night, Donald Trump didn't mention the word wall. I think he may have mentioned it once in passing. I think he said immigration a couple times, but not the wall. Well, there's probably a reason for that, which is that it's not going to move any new voters. But Hillary Clinton didn't try to provoke him to talk about it because maybe her internal polls tell her she's doing fine in New Mexico or something like that. If the race tightens, for example, in the Southwest, we'll see more talk about the wall. If the race tightens more in the upper Midwest, Michigan, Pennsylvania, we'll see Hillary Clinton really pushing harder on trying to persuade kind of blue-collar white voters there that she's her candidate. So a lot of this will be driven by polling. I will say, just in closing, Donald Trump, what we saw from Donald Trump is what we're going to get. There is no new Donald Trump. There is no Donald Trump who can behave maturely. This is it. This is as presidential as he is going to get.
And let's leave it there. Lincoln Mitchell, thank you very much. And you too, David Love and Jocelyn Sage Mitchell. And, of course, if you want to see the program again, you can watch it any time by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, you can go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story, and mine @Jane Dutton. From me, Jane, and the rest of the team, thanks very much for watching. Bye-bye.